Okay, hello chess players. Today we're going to be taking a look at an opening after e4, e5, knight f3, bishop c5. This is called the Busch Gambit, and in this video I'm going to be covering what I like to call a total refutation of the Busch Gambit, because in my previous video on the Busch Gambit, I didn't go over a lot of lines that many people that play the Busch consider main lines, because I felt like those lines were very redundant with lines that you would see out of like a Stafford Gambit, for example. So this video is going to be much more thorough and much more complete, and it's going to completely refute the Busch Gambit. And of course, I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of comments of, well, you didn't cover my line or whatever, and I'm going to try to go over that in the video and kind of explain why at least this gambit is sort of a hard opening for me to cover in a lot of ways. Anyways, if you like content like this, please hit that subscribe button, click your notification icon. So anyways, if they play this, you should just accept the gambit. Now, the biggest complaint I got on the last video was I did not cover the move knight to c6, and everybody was saying, look, knight c6, this is the main line, everybody plays knight c6, you need to cover knight c6. If you're not covering this, you're not covering the Busch gas. So we'll go ahead and we'll just cover knight c6 right away, because in the previous video, the only move I really covered was, moves like d6 or moves that tried to remain independent, because again, I didn't see a ton of independent value in knight c6. Now, of course, if they play knight c6, you should just take it, and they should play d takes c6. Now, this is a nearly identical position to the Stafford Gambit. You can actually transpose. Like, if, for example, white plays pawn to d3 and they play knight f6, bishop e2, it's a transposition into my refutation on the Stafford Gambit. But I will note there is actually a better move here for white, and I'll just call it the total refutation of the Busch Gambit, and that's the move pawn to c3. Now, a name that got mentioned when I did my video is this guy named Grafe, which I guess he plays this a lot. And it's kind of interesting. When I plugged this move c3 into my database, 5 games showed up, only 5 games, and 4 of them were played by Grafe, who was playing the black pieces. And after pawn to c3, he scored 1/2 point out of 4 against this move, pawn to c3, so he lost 3 games and drew 1. And actually, after his next move, if white finds the right next move, he's 0% against this, if white finds the proper next move, because in all 4 of those games, Grafe played the move queen h4, and then in 2 of the games, d4 got featured, and Grafe managed to get a draw in one of those games, and he lost one of those games. But in 2 of those games, the move queen f3 was featured, and he just lost every single one of those games, even though there were only 2. Now, all that being said, I think the actual assessment and what's going on in the position is, of course, more important than the result. And that's why it's difficult for me to make videos like this, because I don't know exactly what fantasy variations people are shooting for here with black. What I do know is that white's position is very simple. White is planning on taking over the center with d4 and then finishing his development. And I also know that the computer gives this as somewhere between +2, +3 pawns. +3 is what Stockfish gives this as an assessment, somewhere in there. It's at least 2.5 pawns. It's a lot. So it's difficult for me to just even almost go past this point. What exactly is black going for? I have this game, Santos Ruiz versus Grafe, played on chess.com in 2023. He continued with queen h6, obviously creating a pin against this pawn, so d4 is not possible right away, but then simply knight a3, and of course d4 is back on. Then we have bishop a3, b takes a3, queen to g6, then simply d3, bishop to e6, queen to g3, castles queenside, queen g6, h g6, bishop e3, white finishes his development. We have f5, f3, he just holds the center together, knight f6, bishop e2. According to the engine, this is decisive advantage white. Again, it's giving us an assessment sky high. It's a +3. White has 2 bishops, white has an extra pawn, white has a better center. And, Grafe continued with king b8, and then white simply castled. There were other moves other than castling here, but all of them are the same computer assessment. This is all just major advantage white. So if you, not even major, decisive advantage white. So if white does lose the game from here, I mean, you can of course play chess from here. You can play chess from any position, no matter how bad the assessment is. But obviously if white loses the game from here, white is up a pawn, white has a better center, white has 2 bishops, white has everything that you could want from a classical position in chess. White clearly has a decisive advantage. If white's losing from here, it has nothing to do with the opening. It is, of course, still possible to lose from here. It's possible to lose from any position. So, I mean, that just leaves me to wondering, like, what are the alternatives here? I don't see a lot of alternatives in the knight c6 line. Like, if you play knight to c6 and you play knight c6, dc6, and I play c3, notice that unlike in the Stafford, where the knight is already putting pressure on e4, there is no pressure on e4, so you can actually get away with the immediate c3 with the threat of playing the immediate d4. I don't see a lot of huge deviations here. And other than playing the hyper-aggressive queen h4, which might be the only move that realistically prevents d4, because at least you can take the pawn, I don't see an alternative to this move that prevents this very simple threat of just taking your pawn on d2 and moving it to d4. What else do we play? We have to put pressure on e4, and we have to be taking that pawn with check, otherwise d4 comes. So queen h4 is the only logical move, and then we have simply queen f3, and then again, d4 is coming. So there's just, I don't see alternatives to this. So basically this one line, queen f3, queen h6, knight a3, takes, and that's almost, I would say that's pretty much all the theory you have to know. I don't know how much deeper you have to go. This is just decisive advantage white. So again, taking a look at knight takes e5, I again have to take a look at alternatives, because if I'm going to call this video what I'm going to call it, which is the total refutation of the Busch gas, I have to take a look at alternatives involving d6. And then, of course, I'm going to play knight f3, and of course the threat is d4. So against just about anything, we're going to be playing d4. But we don't even have to play d4. Like, according to the engine, like, my engine's been out of line with knight f6. And again, it's hard for me to analyze this and be completely objective, because it's like the engine gives a +2 assessment for almost anything white does. So I'm not exactly sure what fantasy lines people are hoping white is going to play that will lead to interesting play or lead to an advantage for black. It's hard for me to determine that. But like, even if I just go down like what I consider like the simplest and most passive line for white, something like d3 castles, bishop e2, rook e8, castles h6, c3, this is given as just decisive advantage white according to the engine. I don't know if this is what people are shooting for, but if they are, they're shooting for the wrong things. I don't know. It's plus like 2.53 according to Stockfish. It gives like over +2. It's insanely high of an assessment. Another way that maybe we can go is like after instead of knight f6, maybe we could try something goofy, like we could try f5. People mentioned this in the comments in my previous video. They talked about ideas involving f5 at some point. Again, I'm not sure exactly how to assess this. Like f5, he takes f5, bishop takes f5, d4, bishop b6, bishop b5 check, c6, bishop back to d3, knight e7, castles, bishop g5 is given as decisive advantage white according to Stockfish. It's plus 2.5. You know, white's up a pawn, white has development, white's castled, there's no threats. You know, it's, again, if white loses from here, which of course is always possible, it's possible to lose from any position, it's nothing to do with the opening. And I mean, that's pretty much all I even know how to cover. Like, I mean, knight c6, d6, c3, with the threat of d4, I don't even see f5 being a serious possibility here. We just cover it with d4. And again, that's going to be huge center for white, up a pawn, no downsides in the position. That has to be decisive advantage white as well. So I think this is basically just the de facto refutation of the Busch gas. I don't think there's any reason to decline this gambit. I think you have to play knight takes e5. And again, I'm sure a lot of people that play the Busch gas are going to be upset. But again, I have a hard time covering this because, I don't know exactly what bad moves you're expecting white to play that's going to lead to advantage black. I don't understand how badly white has to play to make this happen. Maybe we're just hoping that white doesn't know about c3. Because c3 is clearly a refutation, and the man that's promoting this opening, I guess, this Grafe character, he's come against this move 4 times and he scored a half a point out of 4. So he hasn't found anything against it. So I guess as soon as somebody finds something against pawn to c3 with the threat of pawn to d4, and they find something that allows black to have some sort of advantage or at least survive, then we'll have a better idea what to do against this. Anyways, I hope you found this content helpful. I hope you found it useful. I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.